Now, for Brits who don't know too much about you and your church, can you just explain how many people follow your church, where you're based, and why you're so influential in America at the moment?
All right, so I'm the minister of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. That's in the Pacific Northwest. If you're looking at a map of America, it's the upper left-hand corner. So, and I've been ministering there since 1977, so a long time. It's a small town, 25,000 people, thereabouts. And our churches, we have 5 churches in our network of churches in that town or in that area. So it's grown significantly over the years, but in the last 5 years, it's basically doubled because of COVID, masking mandates, blue state governors chasing people out of their state, people leaving because they realized they didn't have the pastor or elders they thought they had, people who flaked on them during COVID. So it's a thriving community of 3,000 people, more or less, across all our churches, and I'm the pastor of the main church there.
But of course you have an influence that's broader than Moscow, Idaho. Yeah. It seems that on the national stage here in America, you have a broad influence. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, attended one of your services in Washington, D.C. So can you tell us why you're so influential across America?
The way that happened, I think, is if people ask me what I do, I'm a pastor. That's my vocation. I'm a pastor, but I also write. So I've written a number of books, and I blog regularly, and it's a blog that has significant traffic and garnered a lot of attention over the years. And people have read the books and follow the blog and from around the country or around the world, actually.
You're also undoubtedly controversial to many.
That has happened, yes. But not to my wife.
Not to your wife, and not to, I'm sure, many of your followers. What does your ideal America look like?
Well, I would divide that in two. There's sort of the utopian ideal America centuries down the road. Where are we trying to get to? And there's the ideal set of circumstances. What would be ideal in the next week or so? So what's an ideal circumstance for opportunities, and what would be an ideal outcome? The danger of concentrating too much on the ideal outcome is that you become a utopian idealist, and those people have caused a lot of misery in the world because they try to they fall for the old trap of the overrealized eschatology, where they try to drag the future into the present. And when you try to make heaven now, generally the results are hellish. So I think, but at the same time, you want to have a good idea of where you would like to go. And so I would like to have a country that honors God, honors His law, is expressly Christian, and when it comes to economic issues, largely libertarian. So I call it theocratic libertarianism. So,
how does that look from a practical perspective, particularly on the theocratic side of things? You know, would you accept non-Christians to be in America? Would you actively try and convert them? What would the laws look around blasphemy, for example, and other Christian issues?
Okay, so the thing I would start out by pointing out is that all organized societies have blasphemy laws. We don't call them blasphemy laws, but we have them. So I could go downtown in any major city in the United States and get myself arrested within half an hour on the basis of what I was saying only. Okay, the gent who was just arrested at Heathrow, flying into the UK on the basis of 3 tweets, was arrested. They don't call it a blasphemy law, but it's a blasphemy law. The only question is, which gods are you not allowed to blaspheme? So in a Christian republic, you wouldn't be allowed to blaspheme Christ. In Saudi Arabia, you're not allowed to blaspheme Allah. In the UK, you're not allowed to blaspheme transgenders because that's the God of the system. So the God of the system is always revealed is always protected by blasphemy laws. Now, that doesn't mean that you are ferreting out. It's not like a totalitarian hellhole where you're ferreting out anybody who disagrees. The issue is not does someone conscientiously not believe in Christ. In a Christian republic, that's not a punishable offense at all. We would believe in affirm liberty of conscience, freedom to worship God or not. What a non-believer wouldn't be allowed to do is engage in fighting words. Go downtown, stand on a bench, and start blaspheming Jesus, Mary, Joseph, the whole thing, and starting fistfights. No, you're not allowed to do that.
Some Americans would say that contravenes the principle of the First Amendment, that people have the right to criticize any religion they like, freedom of expression, and so on.
Criticizing is different than blaspheming, right? So for example, in the book of Acts, when there's a riot in Ephesus because the teaching of the Apostle Paul was disrupting the idol trade there, what happened was the city official came in, quieted the crowd down, and said, "These men have not blasphemed our goddess." Right? Now they were teaching something that undermined that whole system, which was why it was damaged in the idol trade. But they didn't go in there and start saying insulting things about things that the Ephesians believed to be sacred. So if I'm talking to in my ideal biblical republic, and I'm talking to someone who said, "I'm just having doubts about whether Jesus rose from the dead, I don't think I can affirm that." And I say, "Well, let's talk about it." There's no actionable thing anywhere. That's not blasphemy. That's doubts. That's the kind of thing that should receive pastoral care or evangelistic attention, and we should have freedom to discuss all of it. But discussing it is very different than in your face, we're going to taunt your God, we're going to taunt what you believe. No, you can't do that. First Amendment absolutists notwithstanding, we've never had absolute free speech in America. You should be allowed to criticize the government. You should be allowed to criticize those who are in charge. You should be allowed to offer criticisms of the Christian faith, all of that. But you need to do it like a sane and sober human being and not like someone who's trying to start a fight.
Would you allow these LGBT pride parades to continue?
Pride parades would be out, right? Public displays of immorality is a good example of the in-your-face taunting. Drag queen story hours is an in-your-face taunting. If someone said, I would like to discuss whether or not this penalty for homosexuality is a reasonable penalty, I say, sure, let's discuss it. Let's have a discussion.
But there would be a punishment for homosexuality.
Yeah, it'd be against the law. Yes.
Why? What's your sort of main argument for that?
Because it's the Bible, right? So in biblical law and Mosaic law, it was penalized. And when I first started ministering in the early mid 70s, 77, when I first started, sodomy was a felony in all 50 states, in all 50, right? And when I bring that up, the point I make with people is the America of 1977 was not a totalitarian hellhole. Right? It wasn't the Handmaid's Tale kind of thing. It was simply a sober, decent society that didn't give its approval to certain things. And we went from just let us get married, it's no skin off your nose, to bake the cake, you bigot. There is no consistent stopping point along that whole spectrum. It really is a slippery slope. And so what I would want, if somebody's going to say, well, you're just saying back in the closet. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying.
In Britain, we had similar laws, and there's a famous case of a man called Alan Turing who was gay, and he was a key person who broke the Enigma code during the Second World War. And he was punished for being gay through the state. I think they gave him chemical castration or gave him certain pills to take because of it. He became very, very depressed and suicidal, and it really ruined his life. And many people see him as, one example of why these laws were immoral is because this was someone who just wanted to live his life and have the freedom to, I don't know, love who he loves, and he was a patriot and he did great things, and yet he was punished by the state in this way.
Yes. So one of the things I'm fond of saying is it's not whether but which. Okay, it's not whether but which. So let's say the law does not harass a gent like Turing. Who are we harassing? The law is going to harass somebody, right? And in Colorado, they're harassing Jack Phillips, the cake maker. So you have to choose, right? You're either going to...
Can they not harass either of them? Can there not be no one who's harassed?
No. Now, of course, you can avoid like a vindictive harassment or a persecutorial thing, and there are good arguments to be made that giving him pills or chemical castration would not be a biblical punishment or appropriate thing to do. But basically, what it boils down to is the sexual revolution, which unleashed a Pandora's box of all kinds of stuff, has wrecked more lives than the cherry-picked examples of someone like Turing being running, or Oscar Wilde, or someone like that. I don't want anybody persecuting anybody, but I think we should have the laws defining what's right and wrong, right? This is publicly acceptable behavior. This is not. And in the United States, what generally happened, there was a case out of Texas in the 80s where the cops had a warrant for a drug thing or something like that. They raided a house, and in the course of the raid, they found two men going at it, and so they just threw that in the charges, and that case went up to the Supreme Court, and it's a good example of how those laws would be generally used, and were used in America. It wasn't a way of singling out homosexuals. It was simply an organized societal disapproval of homosexuality is destructive of societies.
The other controversial area is, of course, women. And I saw this interview with CNN with members of your church, and the CNN journalist was a lady, and she was very, very shocked by some of the things that she was hearing about repealing the 19th Amendment. That's the amendment that allows women to be able to vote. Again, you seem to shock people with this position. What do you make of that? The argument is that you're kind
of...
How
do I defend myself on that one?
Yeah.
I'm glad that CNN had the decency to let us finish the sentence. They didn't just snip out the shocking part. But a good example would be our church polity. We're not in charge of the 19th Amendment or the Constitution, but we are in charge and control of how we conduct elections in our church. And we're Presbyterian, which means it's an elder-governed church, but the congregation votes on the addition of deacons, elders, and calling ministers. Okay, so that's a congregational vote. And when we vote, we don't vote by individuals. So women don't vote. But the flip side is that men don't vote either. All right, households vote. So we conduct the election by household. That means that who casts the vote on behalf of the household? Well, in most cases, it'll be the head of the house, which is a man. But we have a number of households that are headed by women, and they vote. We have single women who are households of one. They're supporting themselves, not supported by their parents at home. And so in Acts 16, Lydia is the woman who is led to the Lord by the Apostle Paul there, and she is baptized together with her household. So she's clearly the head of her household. If she were a member of our church, she would vote. But she would be voting on behalf of the household. So what we're saying, in effect, is that we believe that human societies are not atomistic. They are molecular. And if you honor the molecules, the families, clans, denominations, churches, and you recognize them as having importance, which we recognize by giving them the vote. we've given households the vote, and we don't let individuals, as individuals, vote, men or women.
Do you think America can take lessons from theocratic Islamic societies in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and so on, where they do have these kind of strict sexual morality codes, where they do enforce this stuff, where women are submissive to their husbands and so on? Do you think that there is some lessons to learn there from, as compared with America's what you might call sexual chaos or sexual liberation?
Yeah, one of the reasons why some people are attracted to that is because it looks like stability, but it's not really. I think it's a false. There's a false appeal. I think Islam has a really screwed up view of women, and Christian societies historically have brought, I would call, genuine liberation to women, instead of wrapping them up in a sheet and saying "shut up." So the whole burkification of women, I think, is a grotesque overreaction to the. Now, if someone grew up in a conservative Muslim society and they came over here and showed up at spring break somewhere, they would say, "Oh gosh," and they'd want to get back.
And would they be right to think that?
But no more right than someone who went over Saudi Arabia and saw all the women wrapped up in sheets and said, "I've got to get back to." They both have a point, right? But not a very good one.
I was in Dearborn, Michigan, and Hamtramck last year, and I made a film about Hamtramck is America's only Muslim majority city. They have a complete Muslim council, a Muslim mayor, and it was formerly a very liberal white Polish town, and it has had lots of immigration from conservative Muslim countries like Yemen. And some of the issues that I was confronting was the local Muslim government, or Muslim members of the government, had banned LGBT flags from flying on government buildings. They'd introduced call to prayer every day, sort of on the minaretas or whatever, animal sacrifice in people's backyards. Obviously, that's quite controversial, but on the LGBT thing, maybe you support that. Maybe there are some things in this society.
I would say that's a good thing, but you're saying that's a good thing in isolation. It's sort of like looking at a guy on a pirate ship who is a great gunner or a great helmsman. Yes, but at the end of the day, he's on a pirate ship. It's not a healthy thing. And that was what I was referring to in my talk when I talked about turning the border between Michigan and Ohio into the border between India and Pakistan. That is the price we're going to pay for that is far in excess of any minor benefits that we get from it. The one thing that's good about it is that it exposes the hypocrisy of the liberals who want to import massive amounts of Muslims who then do that, right? So it's like the Queers for Palestine sign. Do you guys have any idea what they do to queers over there? Do you have read a book.
Well, I actually interviewed the former mayor of Hamtramck, who was this liberal white lady who has an LGBT flag on front of her store. And I said to her, "How do you feel about the town being governed by Muslims?" And she said, "Well, when it comes to gay people, they're scared in the town. They want to flee the town." And I said, "Well, do you support more immigration from these Muslim countries?" She said, "Yes, of course I do." So maybe there's some hypocrisy or kind of naivety there. There are some on the right, though, who are very critical of Israel and Zionism and who think that Israel has had far too much influence on American politics. And they look to some of these conservative Muslims and they say, well, we should be in an alliance with them. We have similar values when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to some of those more conservative social issues, and we should sort of team up with them against Israel or against other people that we don't support, like all the liberals.
And so I'd say to those guys, all right, so why aren't you calling for us to team up with Orthodox Jews? Orthodox Jews have the same attitude that we do toward pornography and LGBTQ. So are you going to team up with them too? Right. There are a number of Orthodox Jews at this conference here who are on board with the same agenda that conservative Christians have to reclaim our culture. But the people who are, sort of blasting Jews generally and saying, let's team up with these Muslim countries, it's just either hypocrisy or it's stupid. It's just being moronic, because there are plenty of Jews who are on the same page with us, and there are Muslims who are dissolute, right? So you have what it boils down to is, I think there's a tendency for all conspiracy thought to finally settle on the Jews, and I want to fight that with everything I've got.
Doug Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Thank you.